right, so hope everybody's doing well. This is our color basics, color theory. Mostly going to be focused on mixing in this video. So really just talking about the mechanics of mixing the paint and some of the basic color theory related to the physical properties of the paint. And then in some videos that follow, I'll be doing demoing some application of some of the principles and some more principles that are not discussed in this video, so definitely watch both. But I think I'm excited for this video. It's been a while in the making, and I'm looking forward to it. I love mixing color. It's definitely a constant learning experience here, so I talk about it a little bit moving forward too, but the best way to learn color is to just mix and mix often and play around, experiment, have fun with it. It can be a little bit, I think, frustrating at first, attempting to get the color that you want or repeat the same color, or get the color to do what you want to create the illusion that you're trying to create on the canvas. Whether you're doing realistic or abstract, all these principles are the same, and it can definitely initially be frustrating, but have fun with it and experiment. That's the best thing that you can do. So that being said, let's get started. I have, we'll be working from two handouts that we'll kind of be following along with. One is going to be the notes on color handout that we posted on the Black Book and emailed to those of you not on Black Book, and then the other one is going to be this color wheel that breaks down the basic main colors and how they, to help understand how they work together. And then I also am posting a second color wheel that's just kind of, I think, helpful. Different versions of it. There's a bunch of different versions out there. I think the main one that we'll be working from is the most useful in its design. I found it online a while ago, and I think it's a good one. So, so basically, we're going to kind of start off just by looking at the palette and looking at the different color families. So this will be, what I have here is based on the limited color palette that we're going to be working with. So that's going to be the alizarin crimson, the cadmium yellow light, and the ultramarine blue. Then we have the ivory black, the titanium white, and then the burnt sienna over here. And those are the main colors that we'll be working with. I will be introducing some other colors, you know, for those of you that have more of an expanded color palette. I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up too. So what I have here is I kind of already pre-mixed out the color wheel just so that things move a little faster for this video. And what we're going to be talking about just is the basic color family. So the first main color family group is what's known as your primary colors. So that's going to be red, yellow, and blue. And these are the colors that you can't mix necessarily to get to, right? They are our main primary colors. And then we have our secondary colors, which are going to be the orange, the green, and the purple. And those are the colors that are created when mixed in equal amounts or strengths of the primary colors. So yellow and red will make orange, red and blue make purple, blue and yellow make green. And then from there we have what's known as the intermediary colors, which are going to be the colors that are halfway between the secondary and the primary. Right? So, and going all the way around the color wheel. So these are created by taking the secondary and mixing it towards one of the other primaries. So we have, in this category, we have the blue-green, the yellow-green, the yellow-orange, and the red-orange. Then we have the red-purple and the blue-purple. And these are these guys here. I put a little bit of white in and a little patch next to it, just so you can see. Oftentimes with darker colors, especially when you're trying to get a temperature right, it's helpful to just take a little bit off to the side, put a little white in it, so you can kind of see where you're falling. Because in the video it's a little difficult to see, but also in real life it can be sometimes difficult too, so that's something that can be helpful. And then the other color group that I do not have up here, but I'll be demoing some of it, is what's known as the tertiary colors. So that's going to be all of your grays and browns and the more earthy colors that are more neutral or less saturated, which we'll talk about that vocab word coming up here and how to get those colors. Essentially though, you're basically mixing the primaries together, all of the primaries together, these three in varying amounts with one another, using its complementary color to create, which I'll talk about, the neutral colors here. So I'll be demoing that coming up, but those are known as the tertiary colors. So tertiary colors are a mixture of all the primaries in different amounts. And then we have what's known as, so if we look at our color wheel, we have we have our primary in the center, the three center shapes, and then the large triangles right on the outside of that, it will be our secondary, and then these are all of the intermediary right here, all the pure colors. The tertiaries are not pure colors, so they've been neutralized or adjusted in saturation by using what's called the complementary color. So a complementary color is going to be a primary color with the opposing secondary color across from it on the color wheel. So blue and orange are going to be complementary colors, green and red will be complementary colors, and yellow and purple will be complementary colors. So when you mix these colors together, it will neutralize or kill the saturation, and we'll keep talking about that here in a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of show you just while we're here. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow and let's take just a little bit of purple too. So I'm going to start with just the yellow-purple complementary color combination. So let's take the center purple here. It's got a little bit of the red-purple on it. That's okay. I'm going to throw some white in it so we can see it a little bit better. One thing I wanted to point out, and I think I've mentioned it before, but putting your white in a long stream like this can be helpful to always make sure you're getting a clean white when you need it, or at least know what color might be contaminating it when you do. So this is the straight purple, or the middle purple. Let's see, got a little bit of red in it now. And when I want to neutralize that, so when you put the complementary color with it, it starts to take it down a notch. And I'm going to keep adding it this way, so you can kind of see it as it changes. I'll add a little bit more white here in a second. You can see it's kind of starting to mix both of them together, and I'm going to throw a little more purple in because the red that I had in there from that batch was taking it to an orange. But you can see that as I get equal amounts going, I'm going to add a little more yellow, touch more purple. So you can see you start to get a nice neutral tone or color from mixing those together. So when you mix complementary colors together, you get gray. And as we know in Juno, so I always think that where you live has a pretty strong effect on how you see or colors that you're interested in, either working, having them enter your work or resisting them for various reasons. So when I was in San Francisco painting, I noticed my colors were very intense. There's a lot of vegetation there, a lot of flowers and trees and just colorful buildings. In general, it's a very colorful place, and I noticed that my work tended to be that way. And since I've moved to Juneau, as we all know, there's lots of grays here in Juneau, and we also know in Juneau that there is a wide variety of gray. Gray is just not a simple color. It's very complex with wide range, so your complementary colors can give you some really nice neutrals and grays that you can use in your work. I'm going to go ahead and get a little, so you can see what the intensity looked like at the beginning before I neutralized the whole batch. This would be the transition as it rolls this way. I'm going from neutral saturated towards neutral. I'll go ahead and do the blue, and then you guys have some familiarity with the blue to orange is the complementary color. I'm going to throw just a little bit of white in there too, just from when we used our monochromatic painting doing the open grisaille, closed grisaille process, because we used our burnt sienna, which is essentially just a orange of sorts. It's got a little more of a red orange, and it's got a little bit of a blue in it to kind of make it a little more neutral than just the straight red orange. So you're familiar with what this color does. So the blue's still hanging on, so I'm just going to keep adding my orange to it. Doing here is called overcorrecting. And I think this orange might have a little extra yellow in it, not quite straight down the center, so that's why it's kind of kicking to the green. But you get the idea. I see that kind of adding a little bit more of a red orange to it, took it to a more flatter, even gray here. So even just that little bit of extra yellow that's kicking towards this way is pushing the blue into the green zone. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. I'll throw a little white in there just so you can see the color difference between this gray and this gray. And now let's do the red. Sorry, alizarin crimson. Do it right up here and try not to block your view. I'll throw a little white in right off the bat so I can see the color as it shifts. So this is just the straight red, and so the complementary color of that is going to be the green. This looks like a pretty good even green. I'm going to steal from that a little bit as I go forward. So by throwing the complementary color in, we're getting even the transition colors are nice, and just getting less and less saturated as we go more green. You also notice it's getting darker, to talk about here. I'll lighten it up and do it fast here. Steal a little bit of my blue-green. So alizarin crimson's a fairly strong color. If you ever get too much on your brush, I just do a quick dab off on the side, kind of helps control. Alizarin crimson's got strong tinting strength to it, so it's mixing out a little slower. And all right, it's now starting to get more neutral. To the gray. Grayed out version there. All right, so that's going to be our complementary colors. So the primary and the secondary directly across from it. That helps you control both your saturation and your value, which we'll talk about here in a second. So I'll go ahead and wipe those off. I'll leave a little bit there. Everything good. So that's the basic grouping of color families there. And then we're going to just talk a little bit about the different vocabulary that you'll hear when people discuss color. And these things, these vocabulary words are useful when we're talking with one another in class, also when you're talking with people about your own art. And it's also helpful to communicate specifically about a certain color as opposed to saying periwinkle. You can describe it as a warmer blue, slightly neutral, and on the lighter spectrum value-wise would be a good description of like a periwinkle color, as opposed to saying periwinkle, where we all might think a little bit of a different color. So it's a way of kind of verbally getting directly to something that can be a little complex. So these vocab words are helpful with that. And the first vocab word on our list is hue. So that just refers to the name of the color: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, or violet. Just like with value, every object will have, when we're talking about an object, its hue. Every object has a local value, so that's the value without any light on it. Every object will have a local color, right? So, for example, a generic red apple without any light on it, or without sunlight or reflective light or anything bouncing in and around on it affecting that red color, its local hue or its local color will be red. So every object will have its own local color. And then the next one down on the list is going to be local value. And the local value is referring to the paint's intrinsic natural value. So for example, the local value of alizarin crimson is darker than the unmixed local value of cadmium yellow light. So each color will have its own starting point value-wise, which comes into play when you're mixing color, how heavy-handed you are with it and whatnot. So that's what that's referring to. Saturation or chroma. So this just refers to the color's intensity. So typically right out of the tube, your color will be the most purest, or 2 out of the tube will be your most pure, or I should say saturated, or the most saturated, or the most high chroma. So high chroma is going to be more saturated and intense. Low chroma is going to be more neutralized or grayed out. So when we're talking about chroma or saturation or intensity, that's what's being referred to. In general, most paints will be at its highest chroma 1 right out of the tube, except for when you're dealing with some of the darker colors will have a higher chroma. So I'm going to add just a little bit more of the purple pigment to the white and purple mixture, and you'll see that chroma increased. So it's right around in the mid-range, the middle value range, that you'll get the most chroma or saturation of your color in that middle value, which comes in handy when we start utilizing color to unite with form to create the illusion of a three-dimensional object. Okay, and next up on our list is going to be color temperature. So we'll talk about light temperature later, but this is just specifically speaking about the temperature of a color, whether it's a warm or cool, which is oftentimes referred to and super helpful for a lot of reasons, which we'll discuss in a little bit more in this video, but more so in the next videos. So when we're talking about a warmer color, that's mostly just referring to colors that tend to have a little bit more yellow in them. And then cooler colors, yellow, and sometimes orange or red, but in general yellow's the more dominant one that tends to show up more frequently. And the cooler colors will lean more towards blue or green, but mostly blue. If we were to even just look at the tertiary colors here, the orange is a little bit harder to see. We'll talk about that one in a second here, but if we just looked at the greens are real easy to see that this color here, the yellow green, is warmer than the secondary green, and the blue intermediary green is cooler than both of these greens because it's shifting towards the blue spectrum or shifting towards the yellow spectrum to get warmer. Same thing's happening here, right? So this is cooler, this is a middle warmth, and this is the warmest because as it's going this way, it's getting towards the red. And then the yellow and the red are both opposing, could both be considered warm colors. However, if we were to just look at these, this yellow orange is warmer than the straight orange, and the straight orange is warmer than the red orange. And the reason that is because this particular red, or alizarin crimson, has some blue to it. So if you take this alizarin crimson and you just take a little white to it, you can see that it starts to get a little bit of a red purple going, not just a straight pink. It's got a little blue hue to it. So that's why this is looking a little cooler here, because it has more of that red in it. And the yellow is also the more dominant warm color compared to, in particular, that red, but also other reds, which we'll look at some cadmium reds, which have a little bit of a yellow kick to them, which is the more thought of straight, fire engine red. That's what we're referring to when we're talking about a color's temperature. Let's see here. I'm just going to get rid of that. And get rid of these here. So while I'm doing it, one good thing, and I'll bring this up frequently, hopefully remember to, is we want to keep our palette as clean as possible, especially when we're doing color charts, which I'm going to have a suggested, not required, just due to our current world circumstances. Everyone's got different things they're dealing with, so I don't want to make it required, but I do recommend it. The color charts are helpful. I have 2 different versions that you can do, either doing experimenting with your color palette just to see what's there, what you can get, and just learning from that process, or working from the photo reference of our current indirect grisaille to full color painting process, working from the colors in that photo reference to explore it before you add color, or working from a new photo reference for a new painting that you're doing for our final grade. Totally up to you if you do it. So definitely keep your palette clean. You don't want to contaminate as you're going. And then as you're painting, it's always good to wipe off your palette. It's always at this nice spot when it's juicy and things are kind of mixing in a helpful way, but then it goes to a spot where it's just sloppy and you'll end up putting that slop on your painting. So keep your palette clean as often as possible. So let's look at, let's see here. The sheet. So next we're going to just look in just a little bit at the opaque, semi-opaque, semi-transparent, and transparent qualities of paint. So in our current palette, our opaque paints are going to be the white is an opaque color, and so is our cadmium yellow light. So any of the cadmiums are all going to be opaque. And this white in particular, zinc white, semi-transparent. Permalba is also semi-transparent, which is just a mixture of zinc and titanium. And then cremins or lead white is going to be an opaquer paint. And then our semi-transparents are going to be, and it says this information is usually on the back of any of your tubes, which is super helpful to look at for a variety of reasons. And then if it's not, all the websites tend to have that information, so you can look that all up. Make a little note and a marker on your tube if you want to, if you're first learning. So then let's see, our semi-transparent in this grouping is going to be our burnt sienna, and our ivory black are going to be semi-transparent. So that just means, when we're talking about opaque, semi-transparent, or transparent, it's basically talking about the color density of the pigment and its ability to be seen through when done, in a thinner wash, or even in some cases thicker. A lot of the transparency you can see through even in a thicker wash. It's just more of a dominant veil, as opposed to if it's thinner, it's a lighter veil of that color, like when you're doing glazing with the transparent ones. You can glaze with semi-opaque. The light doesn't go through quite as clear, but you can still see quite a bit of the color. You can also do it with an opaque, even if you were to glaze with an opaque white, real thin, it will kind of push down the intensity or the chroma of the color that's beneath it, take a little bit of the edge off. With just a teeny bit of white mixed in with your glaze. So there's a lot of potential with all of them as far as glazing is concerned, but the transparent you can see through really well. The light goes straight through it, bounces back nice and clean too. So the other thing that will affect outside of whether you can see through it or not is what's known as tinting strength. So tinting strength is related to, in a lot of cases, the opacity or transparency of a paint. And this is just a general rule. Each color has its kind of own way of working. But in general, the opaque paints and the semi-opaque are going to have stronger tinting strengths than the transparent. And so tinting strength is the ability for the color to maintain its own identity as you mix other colors into it, or if you're using it as just an adjuster to a slightly change of color, you're going to have to put more paint in of one that has a weaker tinting strength and less of one that has a stronger tinting strength. And the best way to kind of test your tinting strengths will be to do it with white, I guess, is the easiest way to kind of see. So let's do a little bit of white and let's try cobalt violet. So I'm going to put a little cobalt violet out here and some white. While I'm dipping in my white, I'll throw a little bit of cad red medium. So cad red medium, all the cads are going to be opaque, and they're not identical colors, but you'll be able to see kind of so this is our cobalt violet right there. And a little cad red medium. And we're going to put that right up there with our red. Bit. Alright, so let's go ahead and take this cobalt violet. So cobalt violet is, I believe it's a semi-transparent. Yeah, so it's a semi-transparent, but it's a fairly weak semi-transparent. So I put quite a bit there. I'll try to do equal amounts. And you can see how from that to that is, I put quite a bit on, and it did not really, that was a big glob, okay? It took quite a bit to shift it. It's still fairly white. So its tinting strength is very weak. So, that comes in handy when you're mixing colors, to know that if you're gonna want to get to a darker purple, maybe start with your cobalt violet and slowly add the white in, so that you don't have to waste a whole bunch. Cobalt's a fairly expensive color. And then let's take I'm just going to do a little bit. So that's a teeny bit, and it got pretty quick to that level. And I'll do the big glob approach. I'll do even a little bit more because that was quite the same amount that I did. But you can see the cadmium red's tinting strength is quite a bit stronger. So that's a great way to test, your colors. Tinting strength when you're first kind of learning your color palette. Let's see here. All right, so our next one that we're going to want to look at we're kind of moving down the list here. We'll be jumping into looking at what's the section called Important Notes and Hints on Color Mixing. But before we get there, I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about the limited color palette, as well as for those of you that have expanded your color palette, or those that might want to, what you can do to expand it in a helpful way, or at least with some forethought involved on it, so that you're getting the most that you can out of your palette. You'll find that you can get most of the colors that we see in our natural world, or at least a relative closeness to it with this limited color palette. The benefit of it is the limited color palette is that it kind of immediately, by having a more simple color palette, it creates a faster color harmony, because most of your mixtures that you're going to be making are going to have these 3 colors in it, as opposed to maybe 4 different reds playing off of 4 different yellows, playing off of 4 different blues. You can start to get into a spot where you might not have that color harmony, and we'll talk more about color harmony in the next video, but that is one of the benefits of the limited color palette. It allows you to get color harmony faster, and it's also a fast way of just learning color as opposed to too many colors. Right now I have like an insane number of colors. I'm trying to expand my understanding of it. One thing that I'm realizing though is a lot of times I spend all this time mixing some crazy colors together that I haven't experimented with. I end up with a color that I could have gotten with more of a limited color palette, or one that I was using previously that was a little more expanded than this, but not by much. Which is good to know. So you don't have to expand too much unless you're experimenting for a reason, I guess is what I'm getting at. And then the secondary, for those of you who are looking to expand, there's a couple suggestions that I would give. So first would be, if you're going to expand and you're going to expand into the primary zones, it's good so looking at your primary colors, it's good to create a setup where you would have a warm and cool. So if you're going to get red, and you only want to buy 1 red, or you only have the money to, or you just want to slowly build and expand out, getting a red that's either going to be cooler or warmer, and significantly so, than the red that you already have. So, you could get, this is the Cad Red Medium, and I'm just going to put a few more out. So that's the Cad Red Medium, and then this is the Cad Red Deep. So you can see it's quite a bit darker, and has less yellow in it. So you can see that starts to, just by putting that there, that starts to make that look a little more orange. If I were to pick, I would probably go with this guy here, because I know I could add a little bit of alizarin crimson and get this to get pretty close to that. And then the next one, I'm just going to put just the Cads out just so you can see them, because they have a pretty wide range. So cadmiums are all just one chemical that's heated to different levels. So every time it's heated to a different temperature, it reaches a different level of, or a different hue or a different color of that same chemical. And so you can see as the light, that starts to get more to an orange. It's more of a red-orange. So it's got quite a bit more yellow to it. So picking, one of these to play off this might be nice. You can see that this color here could get to that with just the right amount of yellow or the right temperature yellow. So then the next, over on this one here, you know, you could get two different yellows. I'll put two different ones out. I'll start with the, so that's just the Cad Red, or Cad Yellow Light. And this is going to be the Cad Yellow Medium. So you can see that that Cad Yellow starts to, the medium one is quite a bit more, has more warmth, and makes this, which is our warmest color on our limited palette, now becomes a cool, relatively speaking. So color temperature is relative to one another, and I'll put more of these yellows out here in a minute to show you a little bit more of that relativity. And this would be another option for expanding. I just wanted to show you a few. That's going to be the Yellow Ochre. Hopefully you guys can see it from far away, but it's got, you know, it's got a little bit of a red, or a red orange to it. So it is warm. So you could get rid of that one, and that would be cooler, and that would be warmer. This one's more saturated, and you can take it to this pretty easy. Maybe a little burnt sienna, a teeny bit of blue, if you wanted to shift those colors. And on your blue, so what's interesting about this limited color palette is that what makes it a good one to work with is that you know, your red has a little bit of a blue in it. The blue has a little bit of red in it, and you can see, especially when it's next to these more pure yellows or warmer yellows, that has a little bit of a green to it, a little green hue to it. So they already have a little bit of some other colors in it, which gives them some diversity or ability to flex different ways. And a lot of colors have that. These ones in particular are good for that process. So looking at just some blues, I don't think I pulled very many, but the cobalt blue is always a fun one. Hopefully you can see from far away. I'll put it here, we can wipe it off. But that's the cobalt blue, and you can see that it's definitely got a little bit of, this one here is a little warmer, the ultramarine, and this one's a little cooler. Goes more towards the blue. This one goes a little bit into the red, like I just said. And this one is a little more saturated feeling right out of the tube, which can help you get to a different colors spectrum if needed. And all of these mix, you know, these ones have different colors, little subtle hue shifts in them that when mixed with your other colors will give you more variety and subtlety. Even if we were to mix these out and get grays with some oranges, we would see different variety in these three here. And then this one here is, you know, starts to get a little bit of a greenish. This one's the cerulean. I'm just gonna do it. We're just gonna throw a little. So this is the cerulean in white. I always feel a little rushed in the demos in class, but you're all at home. Might as well have a little bit of the benefit of not being together. I prefer to do all of this in person and just help you with your individual color quests. But for now, this is the way we are. So we'll get something out of it good here. I'm going to take it a little bit lighter even, just so you can see the temperature. So hopefully you can see that, but the cerulean almost has a little warm yellowish, and that's probably from the green, right? So I'm adding the blue and the green together. The blue and the yellow together give it a little bit of a green. When it's more saturated, it shows up as a little more yellow, especially next to this one. This one goes a little more purple. So this still has a little bit of red in it, and let's look at what the alizarin or the ultramarine looks like right next to these guys. Too much white. So now that's quite a bit more purple. And I was going to show you some different color stuff here in a minute, but you can see how, relatively speaking, that looked more purple next to this one, but now that a real purple or a more real purple gets on the scene, That one starts to look less purple and more blue. This one starts to push into the green even more. So just relatively speaking, color is very dependent on what color is surrounding it. So those would be, an interesting way to expand your color range in your blues, so you have a warm-cool dynamic to play with. And then when you're looking at some of your secondary colors, my recommendation for that, you can do the warm, since you can't really do the warm-cool as easily because you're mixing these in your limited color palette, right? But what you can do is get colors that are, so if we were looking at orange, we want to pick colors to expand if you're looking at the secondaries. One thing to think about is to get colors that you can't get to that level of saturation with these two here, right? That has a real high saturation, a purity to it that you wouldn't be able to mix too. So if you ended up having like a field of orange flowers or something that you really needed to punch, or a really awesome pumpkin, we'll talk about using relativity in the application process to use this limited color palette by using colors that are around it to make these colors feel more intense. But a faster route would be to get some more intense colors. So even this one here, this is a transparent color, so that's another option, is picking a color that might be more versatile in its opacity or transparency for a secondary or even a primary. So that would be another orange, and that one is a transparent orange. This one is a cadmium orange, so opaque, transparent, and Gamblin. A lot of brands have some great transparency colors out there. I'm experimenting, like I've showed you guys in class, a ton with glazing, and have a whole bunch of new transparent colors. So that's an example of pushing that up. I also think with like our purple's also can be a challenging one to get at a mid-tone level, something that's saturated. So that again is the cobalt violet, and I think that's the only one that I pulled. There's an ultramarine violet, there's a dioxine violet, there are quite a bit of violets out there that could be good. A cobalt, that's the cobalt violet, and that was the other one I was just playing with. Anyway, it'll come to me. But picking a violet that's got a little more bump to it. However, just by diversifying your blues and diversifying your reds, you can start to get to some better violets. So that's something to play with as well, to increase your range on your secondary as far as the violets are concerned. So that's the the basics of expanding, I guess. And I actually have one other one that could be a cool way. So the I was trying to remember here. So I use Sharpie on my palette all the time. It's a great tool, so you can, and I'll talk about here when we're talking about color mixing and experimenting, but sometimes I just forget what color it is name-wise, and it doesn't really matter because you're always thinking warm, cool, neutral, but sometimes when you're trying to remix something, it's helpful to see what that is. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to put another blue out. So this one's the phthalo blue. So when we're talking about tinting strength and we're talking about the intensity of a color, there's some colors that are referred to by some as a power color. And alizarin crimson is pretty intense, and ultramarine blue can get up there as well. But any of the phthalos will have like a nice kick to it that you can't really get chromatically with some other colors. So you can see how that blue really is electric. These power colors tend to have a little bit more of a artificial, in a way. Not, I love them, but they can not feel quite as natural. The more white I'm adding to it, the more natural it starts looking here. But a power color like a phthalo is really helpful. This one's a little more natural than you'll see some of the other ones I'm going to pull out here. but you can see how that takes it to a whole new level color-wise. So that could be a good one to diversify. So maybe you get a warm and a cool, and then one power color for your primaries. And this one here, so let's just do a little bit of white. And it's good to make noises when you're mixing. Makes it fun. Okay, so alizarin crimson and white. It's got some kick to it. So alizarin crimson is a pretty strong, can be a pretty strong color. An interesting fact about alizarin crimson is that it's one of the more fugitive. So if a color is not light fast, which means that it will fade, it's called a fugitive color or a non-light fast color. Alizarin crimson is one of those, at least the initial ones, is because it's actually a clear particle dyed that color as opposed to the actual pigment particle. And that they just, not that long ago, I'm getting older, so maybe it was a long time ago, but they just came out with a permanent alizarin crimson, so that's what it's referring to, is that it is light fast when they say permanent. Oops. So mix it right here. So this is, what I just put down there is my quinacridone red. So any of the quinacridones, they're a synthetic chemical created in the lab. And they're really strong colors. But you can do a lot of cool stuff with these when you're mixing, get to some really interesting colors. So any of the quinacridones are going to be great power colors. So they have, quinacridone magenta, quinacridone red, a whole variety of quinacridones that you can choose from. So there are other synthetic ones out there. I haven't played with a ton of them, but they're worth it, giving it a shot to see what you can get. So you can see that looked intense, but now that looks very neutral compared to quinacridone. So, and then I was going to show you the phthalo green, just so you can see. So this would be a power color of the secondary color family, where these were both the primary. So this is phthalo, and there's like a phthalo emerald, which goes a little more turquoise, a little warmer, has a little more yellow in it, but you can see how that's a really intense color that would be difficult to get to with our limited color palette. So that could be a great color to add in. See here, I did forget I had a couple secondary greens to put out here. So Viridian is a nice green, and you can probably, I think it'd be a little difficult to mix to the Viridian. But it's more of a neutral, so just do it right here. I believe this Viridian, so it's quite a bit cooler, right? But it's cooler right out of the tube without having to add anything to it, which is again nice at the mid-tone level. I'm going to put a little more on. So we might be able to get semi-close to that with what we have, but definitely if we added some of these blues or some of these yellows into the mix to get to here, and then use some red to neutralize it, complementary color to take it down a notch. So that could be a good one. Get something cool to play off these that tend to be a little bit warmer in general because of the red in this, and that being the yellow or the warmest. So that could be good. And trying to keep track of the time. It is late, and I get in trouble when I go home too late. We're doing good. So Viridian, another one that I like actually, because it's a fun one to neutralize because it's just so straight green, is Permanent Green Deep. Permanent Green Light starts to get a little into the yellow, so I kind of like the deep version. But again, as you're doing this, exploring your color world, you get your own preferences. But you can see how that's like right out of the tube. that was my mid-level green, but you can see that the strength of that's pretty strong right out of the tube, which is nice. And let's see here. Still, it's just a little bit cooler. I put quite a bit of white in, so it feels cooler, but still in general, relatively speaking, is cooler than these. It's more saturated, so it's kind of hard to see. Sometimes it looks like, oh, it's got more yellow, but these definitely have a little more yellow to them. But it's definitely, warmer than that green there, which goes to more blue-green. So the permanent green is also a good choice. And then another one that I like is the cad green, and I'm going to put it over here just because it is more of a yellow green. It's such a little amount, but I'll mix it again up top for you here. But again, right out of the tube, it's a lighter local value than these other greens for sure, which is nice to have one that's a lighter local value right off the bat, but still saturated. So you can see as I add the white here, it is still really warm. It's got a lot of yellow to it. So even as I lighten it, it still stays quite a bit warmer. As you see when I lightened these ones, remember how cool, even though this one's fairly warm relative to this one, and it's still pretty warm. It's close to that in a way. But when I added that white, if you remember correctly, it kind of got pretty cool pretty fast. Where this one, the more white I'm adding, it's still getting cooler than it was initially, but it still remains in that yellow zone. So that's a nice one to kind of maybe increase your warmth aspect, where these could become cooler, relatively speaking, to this one here. And let's just throw a little bit of cad red in one of these greens here. That was too much. So you can see how it's neutralizing. It's becoming kind of a nice purple. If I add more red, I'll kind of keep pushing into neutral lavender green coming. So that would be my suggestions as far as expanding. And you can also play with, have a couple new favorites, and then I'll stop because we're running out of, I'm going to keep on track here. I'm going to kind of clean this space up. Just a couple cool ones. So if you have your ivory black, right, which was a semi-opaque, this one's a chromatic black. I just put a ton out, which is fine. I might steal from over here. So that's a chromatic black, and then these two are both asphaltum, but by a different company. And so that one's asphaltum, which is a very dark color. It's more of like a brownish color. And then this is going to be the asphaltum by Mussini, which is a great brand. It's a little more expensive than the Gamblin, but it's a nice brand. But you can see how they're all fairly dark. That one's quite a bit darker, so that'd be a black, chromatic black. Just add a little white to it. See a really beautiful brown when you add a white right into there. It's just good to have a diversity of some darker colors, as you'll see moving forward. Dark colors can be useful. And then knowing what they mix out to temperature-wise. So that one starts to get a little into the burnt sienna world. But what's nice about all three of these, where burnt sienna is a semi-transparent, these are all three straight transparent. So the reason I like these is because I'm playing with my transparencies, and these give you some really cool options when you're playing with glazing and transparency. And then see, this guy here gets into the blue. So if you want to diversify your blacks or your darks, that could be a great, three great additions for some darks, and addition for a black with that black. Now let's mix a little bit of just our ivory with a little bit of white, just so you can kind of see. So that's quite a bit warmer, right? And this one here, but not as warm as this one. And that one's warmer than this one, right? So you can see that spectrum there of darks. So if you're trying to use a darker color with a little bit of a complementary kick, so let's say you wanted to darken your orange a little bit with a darker color, but you wanted it to neutralize a little bit faster, maybe use the chromatic black to darken, which we'll talk about darkening colors here coming up. And I think I have a couple, and I'm not going to do it so we can keep moving on, but the burnt umber and the Van Dyke brown are two really great colors to diversify your brown zone, which is a warmer. This will be cooler, and this will be a lot cooler. The Van Dyke brown's, I think, a beautiful color to experiment with as well, and diversify or expand for those of you looking to, or that will at some point in your painting life. Wide world of color out there. All right, so now we're going to go through the hints. I've broken up the hints and information and whatever I called it, important notes, into two sections. One's the section that we're covering in this, and some of it kind of could be covered in this video, but I'm trying not to make these too long. So there will be the ones that are not covered. If I have time, I'll kind of read them off real quick, but they will be covered in the other videos. The other videos are going to be more about the application process of how to use the rules and the way that color works to create space and form. So important hint number one, so you want to squint often. So squinting helps, just like with value, it helps simplify what you're looking at. So sometimes if the color's super saturated, or if you're staring directly into one space, it'll feel more saturated. But when you squint, it allows you to take in the whole, so you can see the relativity easier. You can also see the local color easier, and not get too lost in the nuance of that color, the little subtle shifts here and there. It allows you to see the general as opposed to the specific, which is really helpful, especially in the beginning. Also helpful with color relativity and temperatures. So squint often, just like with drawing. When we squint, that reflective light starts to look more part of the shadow as opposed to when we're staring directly at it. Same thing happens with color. The next helpful hint is to pay attention and be present when you're mixing. The best way to learn color is to practice a ton and to experiment, but to do it mindfully. I catch myself often not, and I always regret it, so I focus on that. I do a lot of color experimenting when I'm trying to get a layer together for my larger pieces, and then I have to mix bigger batches of it and match the smaller experimental ones. And I try my best to stay focused during that because I can learn so much from it. So pay attention. You never know what you're going to get when you're experimenting. And I recommend it even to take notes on what you find out when you're mixing, either for your charts or for a painting. So it's like I said with my Sharpie. So what I'll do is when I'm mixing, sometimes I run across a color that doesn't work for the painting that I'm working on. But I like it. It's a beautiful color, and it's an interesting combination that could do some cool things. So I usually just write down with Sharpie right below it, and then I'll take a picture with my phone, and I have a folder on my phone that I either save it for that particular painting's future, or into another folder where it's just, hey, I might need this color later, and I can kind of scroll through if I'm looking for a cool color and need to make it quick. I have some work pre-done, so that can be a great tool. And the Sharpie is real nice because it just, with a little bit of terp comes right off, turpentine or terpenoid, but also with your palette scraper comes right off, no problem. That was pretty wet still. It'll leave a little bit of a stain. You can just rub it right off, no problem. So experiment, have fun with it. See what you'll get. Color that I think is kind of nice. that I wouldn't expect is going to be if you take your Viridian, right, which is a green, and you take a little bit of Cad Red medium, throw a little white in there. You get a really nice kind of neutral red purple because of the blue that's in this green. You can get some kind of, I think it's almost the exact same color as my palette paper. Some nice grays when playing with that color there. There's a ton of colors to play with, so just take notes on what you're doing, or at least be present. When we're mindfully mixing, we get some really cool stuff. All right, so I like to try to keep it simple. When I'm mixing, you can get to most colors by only mixing 3 colors. And that doesn't include your white. Sometimes it's just 2 colors. I try not to go past that. I mean, sometimes you do and it's fine. And some artists do a ton of different colors. But for me, what I've realized or have experienced is that just like, you know, this has got a little red in it, and this has got a little, it's got a little blue in it, a little red in it, a little green in it. Each one of these colors up here, even the ones I put out for the expanded, have these little subtle shifts of different types of yellows and different types of reds. So when you start putting too many together, you can get a color that kind of loses identity all across the board, or richness or its vibrancy can kind of die pretty quick. So by sticking to just roughly 3 and white, so 4 total, if we count white as a color, you can kind of keep those purities intact and spend less time searching around too much. So if you start to get on a color path where you're losing control of trying to find a certain color, I usually back off and maybe re-examine my starting point color, which I'll talk about, you know, the basic step process that I use to get to a color when I'm color matching or searching for a color. But try to stick it to 3. The next helpful hint is we want to mix our darks. So we want to treat black as a color, which I'll talk here in a second, but we don't want to use black as a tinter, which is basically shifting the value light or dark. You can, because it's a dark color, but you basically want to mix your dark to the temperature and the color that you're actually seeing, because if color is relative, that shadow that you're looking at, and I'll show you in another video how color relativity works when we're dealing with lights and darks. But that shadow that you're looking at, or that a dark object is going to have a color to it. It's not just going to be black or a yellow that you add black to. We want to mix our darks, and the way you can make a dark or take a dark or a color darker is just by oftentimes mixing in the complementary color or just another dark color. But in general, what I'm most important to get is that we're if we want to darken a color, you just add the complementary color is a great way to do it. So let's just say I have a green. Let's take our middle green, and you know, on this green here, it got darker because I added the blue to it, but it still maintained its intensity. Let's just say I mixed this, and I had a little bit of more yellow, and I want to take it darker. I just take a little bit of red, so maybe I'll do 2 batches so you can just see limited color and what I had a teeny bit of yellow. So in this one I'll add just a little bit of my Cad Red medium and took it just a touch darker, right? So if you want to darken a color, just add the complement. And maybe it needs to be a little darker, but it started to get too warm, so I add just a little bit of blue. So it's still maintaining its green integrity, but it got darker and the temperature remained the same. And then let's just throw a little bit of the alizarin crimson in. That's kind of a strong tinting strength, so I did too much. Yeah, I blew way past it. So that got real warm real fast. So I'm going to throw a little bit back in. And again, let's say I'm like, cool, that's about the right value. Maybe a little bit more. But I got too warm, so I just add a little bit of blue, which was in the initial mixture. So it should keep it in the same green color hue, but push it darker and keep the temperature the same. So if we want to darken something, just add the complementary color or another darker color to it. And should be good to go. And I showed you the making a color less saturated by adding the complementary color in, so I'm not going to take it any further on that one, but that was the other helpful hint. We just happened to run across it in my talkings. All right, so we've done quite a bit on the relativity. But color relativity, colors playing off of each other. We'll talk about light more coming up, but how something is either warmer or cooler next to something else. So I'm just going to put out, just for the sake of for fun, I'll just put out a couple of the other yellows here. They're the most, I think, of the cadmiums, the most interesting. The reds are interesting as well, but I might need these colors for another part of the demo. So this one here, and hopefully you can see it. If not, zoom in, pause and zoom in. But that is the cadmium yellow deep. So you can see how this one was warmest, but now with this one in play, that one starts to look a little cooler, and that one is definitely looking quite a bit cooler into the green zone. And then they have also the cadmium lemon, which is an even greener and cooler. It's a little bit of a darker local value than the cad yellow light, but it's definitely cooler. So right here, even in just these yellows, we have a nice wide range. You can see that this one's warmer than this one. That's the yellow ochre, if you remember. So you depending on its relativity, one becomes cooler or warmer depending on which one you're comparing it to. So you want to keep that in mind. Just like value is relative, color being relative becomes a great tool to make the illusion on the canvas that you're trying to make without blowing things out or making everything too super saturated. You can play a lot of really cool games with it. So let's look at, let's see here. Let's going to do a little experiment. So I'm going to take some of this here, which is the transparent orange. And I'm going to add to this, let's see here, a little phthalo. Let's do a little phthalo blue. That's this one here. And what I'm going to try to get here is a kind of a green that feels a very warm green. So I don't know if you can see that very well on the screen there. I'm just going to make a mark on this white tube, but you can see how that's definitely a green. It's a warm green, almost is like a sap green. To go by brand name. So that's a green, a warm green. And now next to it, I am going to take my phthalo again. maybe I should do, let's try. You can see by, let me push a little further, sorry, here, make a bigger batch. You can see by putting this next to that warmer green, just by having this right next to it, it starts to make it look orange. Right? I'm going to warm it up just a teeny bit. So that starts to go into the red-orange zone, where before it felt more green. A little more white. Sorry. Now, we have that, right? So this is the green. It's a blue-green, but a green, and this is more orange now. So let's put right next to that another color. So this is the permanent green with some cad yellow medium. I'm gonna add more white. My white's getting kind of funky, but I think I can work with it here. Now I'm making more of a yellow-green right next to it. And you can see how by putting a yellow-green next to that previously more green, this became orange, then this was a green, but a blue-green. Now this starts to push it way more blue feeling than it had previously, right? So if I cover, there's our initial, I don't know if this is gonna work, and then there's the green next to the orange, and then now we have the green next to the blue next to the orange. So just relatively speaking, depending on what's next to it or around it, it will shift. You can actually even see right here, at least on in person, that this edge feels more green and this edge feels more blue. Now if we take one more shift here and let's do the permanent green again. And let's just do the medium again, but less. This is even more pure green. It starts to push this a little bit more into the yellow. And makes, shifts this one now. And I could probably push up the intensity here, but I think you guys are getting the point. So now that this saturation got more, that one started to feel more neutral. So even saturations are going to be relative. Now this one's starting to feel like more like the yellow one. So color's relative. You can make a color feel like something else by what's around it. I use that all the time in like a large painting. You know, let's say on this half I have more blues, and this half I have like more oranges for the sake of just complementary color. And then I mix a real nice neutral color, just the right neutral, and make a big mark that goes all the way across from the blue side all the way into the orange side, maybe broken up a little bit or maybe just straight through. That one neutral color will look different as it travels all the way across. So it's a great way of creating color harmony, playing interesting visual games when you're painting abstractly, and even when you're painting realistically, it can be a useful tool. So keep that at the forefront of your mind here. All right, so where am I? Hopefully you guys are doing okay. It seems like a lot. We also want to remember, so white is the next helpful hint there is going to be that white is the coolest color on your palette. So you guys have probably been noticing every time I add white to something, it gets cooler. The more white you add, the more color harmony. So the more white added to all your colors, you'll start getting a little more of a harmony happening. So let's just take our Cad Red Deep. I'm just going to throw, let's say I have like a red apple, right? And in this scenario that I'm thinking about, my red apple, I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson. Let's say my red apple, this is like the mid-tone section right here on my little color spot. Let's say as my red apple transitions out of its mid-tone into white, the light, it needs to get lighter, right? This apple is getting hit with a pretty strong light. But notice as I'm adding more white to this, let me get rid of that weird white chunk. As I'm adding more white to this, it's starting to get cool. And let's say in this scenario, and when I do application, I'll show you this more, but it's a very important thing to note, so we're going to talk about it now too. But as I'm moving into the white, lighter value, it's definitely getting super cool. So as you're doing something like this, lightning, and if you need it to maintain its temperature into the warmth, it's super helpful to add just a little bit of yellow back in to warm it back up. Well, you see how that kind of shifted it warm again? So there's a difference between here and here. And there's a teeny bit of a value difference, but not much, and I can always add a little bit more white to decrease that value difference, and then a teeny bit more yellow. So we want to remember as we're lightening something, even darkening, but in general, lightening, it happens more frequently, as we want to make sure we are, let's even go way lighter. We want to make sure we're maintaining our color temperature as we go. So if something's getting too cool as you get lighter, which will always happen with white, adding just a teeny bit of yellow. Sometimes you can add the orange or the red as well, but they will tend to shift the values a lot more harshly or strongly, so it's harder to get just a little dab of the red and the orange to not affect the value as much. So yellow is a great go-to. Let's say that was too warm, I could use a cooler yellow. Let's say it needed to be warmer, I could use one of the other warmer yellows, but be more delicate because these start to get darker in value. So it would darken maybe that a little bit too much, might kick it to the orange a little too hard. But hopefully that made sense there. You want to keep an eye on your temperature, and yellow is a great way of doing that when you're adding white to things. All right, so we want to treat black as a color, not as a means to tint, which I've already kind of discussed. And the reason that is you saw how beautiful these blacks were when we mixed them out. And in that black, the ivory black that we work with is a color. Some people like to use it as a tinter, and it kind of creates a color harmony because it's using one color to do the value shifting. I think it can tend to kill colors and not make them as vibrant, so I tend to go with the complementary color approach more than just black, and I treat black as a color, and I recommend that you do as well, just for the sake of learning some more about color harmony. But let's say we just take a little bit of our limited color palette yellow, the Cad yellow, light. We mix that in to our black. You see we get like a nice green. It's a beautiful neutral green. I'll add a little white to it. So, you know, if you're doing your color charts, on that color chart I have you mix black into all your colors just to see what actual color it gets, as opposed to trying to treat it like a value tinter, to use it as a color to see what you get. And it's a nice green that would play well off of these greens here. A little cooler, a little more neutral, not as saturated. Let's take the same black. And the reason that happened is because there's a little bit of blue in this, as well as a little teeny bit of yellow. But there is blue in this black here. So if that's the case, when we add it to our red, we should get more of a purple. A really nice neutral purple. I'll add a little bit of white just in case that's not showing up. Alright. So treating your black as a color, see what you can get from it. And so that was red. Let's just see what happens with the blue. It has some blue in it. I think it's got a little bit of red though too, and a little bit of the yellow. So that's a little bit more. You know, I think that blue must be fairly dominant in the black, because that's, you know, pretty straight. It's got a blue-gray. Not too different than the burnt sienna and ultramarine. You know, it's a little cooler, right? So you could paint a monochromatic painting with black and burnt sienna, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and black and ultramarine blue as your two colors. One would be warm, one would be cool gray, more flat gray, and be able to have warm, cool aspects to just a monochromatic painting. Just by the versatility of the black, but also the versatility and variety of the grays. So treat your color, black as a color. This is my and then, you know, I also just like to, you know, and black's a good one to talk with this about, is if I do, you know, sometimes just knock in black as like a linear element in a painting, and if you just have black, something that is a black object, we still want to think about temperature. So, you know, oftentimes when I have to do a black, depending on where it is on the painting and spatially and what's around it, you do want to tint it, or change its temperature. And so that's going to be, you know, so I oftentimes will add a little bit of and I like to do ultramarine and alizarin crimson in it. So this is going to be a warmer black. The reason ultramarine and alizarin crimson are good is because they're both transparent too, so you kind of feel like the paint benefits from it. Or if I were to use more of like one of these, it has a yellow in it, so it's going to shift it more to an orange. These are a little bit more of a darker, less dominant color relative. So there's a cool black. Okay. So I got a warm black and a cool black. They're both still black. If you push it too far, throw a little more black in it. So the main rule of thumb, though, is we don't really ever want to use color red out of the tube. We always want to mix it, even with something as simple as a black or even a white, right? So when you're doing a white, that white will have a temperature to it, a warm white or a cool white. So even if it's a teeny bit of something else in it, you'll be better off, and the painting will be more interesting to look at. Not right out of the tube, please. And the last helpful hint is basically how I kind of do it. And I think a lot of people do, so I'm not special by any means, but this is the way I usually start out. My color mixing process is I determine if I'm trying to match a color, and I will do some color matching here coming up. I might have to get going on that. But basically what I would do is, I'll start with this one here. But I would ask myself, what's the local color? Is it a red, a yellow, or a blue? And when I look at this, I see red, I see yellow, and I see a teeny bit of blue. Less blue, more yellows and reds, but it still, to me, is more red. I could start either way, but I probably would start with the red because it has a little bit of a pink to it. So I would ask myself, okay, I'm going to start with a local color red, and we'll just work with our limited palette color. Okay, so I'm going to start with my red. And I am going to, this is a fairly light color. I don't usually hit it with a value shift right up off the bat, but oftentimes when that's a lighter value, that's a good move. Just because, like I said, this is cool, so it's going to shift it pretty quick. Now I'm going to start kind of hunting down that particular pink red. So it's got an orange vibe going on, and you could start in your mental process being like, okay, it's an orange, and just do the red and yellow right off the bat. But I think it's helpful to kind of keep it simple in the, we got some other colors kind of mixing in. Maybe I'm going to push this value right now and throw a little more white out so you don't waste your time watching me deal with greens in my red right away. Okay. Looks like we got a little blue. That's fine. So I'm going to get to this one just using the complementary color. So the value. So what I have here, I guess I should say too, is I just went through. So you can go get color swatches at Home Depot. You can work from your photo reference. If you do with your photo reference, you can just do a little dab on your photo to test it. I'm not going to do it quite yet. But you can test the color on it and wipe it off with the color swatches. This here and the ones I'll be demoing on matching are just in art magazines. I've cut out colors that I'm interested in trying to match, and I can dab it on there. So magazines, color swatches, you can do something around your house if you want, but it is nice to be able to dab on it, especially when you're first learning, so you can see how close you're getting. Cool, so that was a good shift value-wise. It's getting closer. So I'm squinting and I'm looking at it. I'm going to add a little more yellow, so it's starting to get a little too cool. That was a lot of yellow. It's okay though, because I need to add more white to push it back again. And so what I've been doing is I got the color, right? Red, and I'm going towards the orange to get that. Add a yellow to go towards the orange. Then I'm looking at the value. So after you determine basic color, basic hue, then you want to look at your value. You can start pushing it towards the right value, and you can see that I'm adjusting the temperature along the way. But again, that could also just be seen as keeping it in the right color zone. And then from there, I want to look at its saturation. So once I get close, then I want to look at the saturation, and because it's in the orange, I want to kill some of that saturation with a little bit of blue. And that might have been too much. We'll see. If it is, I'll just steal a little bit of the red from there. And you can even just hold your brush over it and make sure it's getting a flat light and squint, and you can see pretty easily. Looking pretty good. Hopefully you can see that color okay. It's got quite a bit of glare. Sorry guys. Anyway, if it's up a little higher, there. So that was the color I was going for, and you couldn't see it very well. I will do a few more of these and add them probably onto a different YouTube post. 3 o'clock in the morning. It's been a long day, so I'm gonna head home, but I hope you all are doing well. And I am still dealing with my gentleman who's been hanging around the campus, harassing, but he's no longer harassing, but he's still around, so it's making it a little bit challenging, but I'm getting more time to get in here. So I will have some more videos posted for you. I thank you for your patience on getting to color. Go ahead and experiment, have fun. You can do whatever route you want, or just start painting. That's fine too. Whatever your life allows you to do, and whatever you have interest in is kind of how we're doing it now. But that's the basic crash course in color mixing and those principles. We will go into more information moving forward. Feel free to read through those. I'm gonna not do that on camera, but it's that next list is important notes, hints, topics on applying color theory. So that'll be in some other videos coming up. But for those of you that have had this lecture before from me, feel free to go ahead and read through the other ones as a reminder and experiment with those as well. Do the color charts, start knocking out some color. Hope you're all well. Thanks for listening, and have a good night.